In this session, we will discuss fraud, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Let's begin with fraud. Fraud is defined as intentional deception or intentional misrepresentation made by a person with the knowledge that the deception could result in some unauthorized personal benefit or an unauthorized benefit to some other person. When evaluating a situation to see if you have potential fraud, you must ask yourself if there is intent. It's important to remember fraud is intentional. It is due to some type of intention that leads to an unauthorized benefit to the individual or to another person. There has to be evidence to support the intent. If there is no evidence, prosecution will not be able to be achieved. As far as investigations go, if intent is proven and there is evidence that has to be combined to show the same period and the amount that was defrauded. There are thresholds with OIG for fraud cases. If the case turns over to be $5,000, it is referred to the Office of Attorney General. If it is under $5,000 and there is a criminal charge that they believe can be proven, it will be referred to the Commonwealth Attorney. At that point, a Commonwealth Attorney can proceed a couple different ways, two of which are to prosecute or diversion. We are now working toward termination following substantiation of allegations. Remember, however, that substantiation does not mean something criminal was proven. So what should you do if you suspect fraud? The next 3 slides give in detail the process for the investigation. A packet will need to be submitted to Dale and should include the following: a letter addressed to the commissioner stating the issue. Make sure you state what you are looking for termination by Medicaid should the case be substantiated. Include any case notes that have any narrative relevant to the topic, as well as timesheets and service documentation, and also the signed employer responsibility and expectations form. Other documents that you can include or may be requested are the MAP 2000, the MAP 351, KHAT, SIS, Life Story Participant Summary, MWMA Service Plan, Employee Provider Contract, invoices, exceptions or exceptional support requests, family member exemptions, incident reports, CAPS, employee applicant paperwork, participant psych evaluations or other clinical evaluations, the employer responsibility and expectation form, and other relevant documentation pertaining to the complaint. Please keep this list so that you have referrals to submit to Dale. You know what could be required in the packet. Additional documents may be requested after Dale's initial review. Dale will then forward it to OIG. Remember, OIG is very careful and their investigations are thorough and private. This will take time to complete. Please do not reveal to anyone outside of your agency that an investigation could be or is occurring. Now let's move on to abuse and neglect. Abuse in adults is defined by the infliction of injury, sexual abuse, unreasonable confinement, intimidation, or punishment that results in physical pain or injury, including mental health. Any indication of abuse requires you to submit a critical incident report, and it must also be referred to APS or CPS. Now we need to discuss abuse in children. Hopefully none of you run across this, but in case you do, let's touch on it. Based on reg language, definition states, abused or neglected child means a child whose health or welfare is harmed or threatened with harm when his parent, guardian, or other person exercising custodial control or supervision of the child inflicts or allows to be inflicted upon the child physically or emotional injury as defined in the section of other than accidental means. Create or allow to be created a risk of physical or emotional injury as defined in this section to the child by other than accidental means. Engages in a pattern of conduct that renders the parent incapable or caring for the immediate and ongoing needs of the child, including but not limited to parental incapacity due to alcohol and other drug abuse as defined in KRS 222.005.12. Continuously or repeatedly fails to refuse to provide essential parental care, and protection for the child, considering the age of the child. Commits or allows to be committed an act of sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, or prosecution upon the child. Creates or allows to be created a risk that an act of sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, or prostitution will be committed upon a child. Abandons or exploits the child. Does not provide the child with adequate care, supervision, food, clothing, shelter, education, or medical care necessary for a child's well-being. A parent or other person exercising custodial control or supervision of a child legitimately practicing the person's religious beliefs shall not be considered a negligent parent solely because of the failure to provide specified medical treatment for a child for that reason alone. Based on that reg language, any indication of child abuse requires a critical incident report and a referral to CPS. So now you know how do you know if abuse, neglect, and dependency is going on? Some forms of abuse or neglect are more difficult to detect than others, but there are always signs or indicators which may suggest a child is in need of help. Indicators of neglect are inadequate or dangerous child rearing practices. It may not produce visible signs and usually occurs over a period of time. It is the failure or lack of prudent care for a child's well-being through lack of adequate supervision, food, clothing, shelter, education, or medical care. Examples of this may be lack of proper supervision, failure to see what the child offends school, denial of necessities of life such as food, water, or clothing, denial of medical treatment and abandonment, malnutrition, and failure to thrive. Physical abuse is the injury by other than accidental means of a child under 18 years of age, which is the result of actions by a parent, guardian, or other designated temporary or permanent caretaker. Examples of this are hitting, kicking, biting, harmful restraint, such as choking, beating, which is repeated blows, use of a weapon or instrument, and actions resulting in substantial pain. Sexual abuse and sexual exploitation may be defined as contacts or interaction involving the use of children for sexual stimulation. The definition remains broad to include molestation and/or rape of a child by an adult or juvenile, as well as acts such as child pornography and prostitution. Sexual abuse can include a wide range of behaviors such as genital exposure, fondling, and oral sex. Emotional injury is any injury to a mental or psychological capacity or emotional stability of a child noted and evidenced by a substantial and observable impairment in his or her ability to function within a normal range of performance and behavior with regard to the child's age, development, cultural, and environment as testified by a mental health professional. Examples of this are withdrawal of love, ignoring, name-calling, ridiculing, threats, isolation, scapegoating, cruel or bizarre punishment, terrorization, and total rejection. A dependent child is one who is not receiving proper care or supervision due to no fault of the parent. The parent is physically or mentally ill or injured. Neglect is a situation in which an adult is unable to perform or obtain for himself the goods and services which are necessary to maintain his or her welfare and health, or deprivation of services by a caregiver which are necessary to maintain the health and welfare of the adult. This too requires a critical incident report and a referral to APS or CPS. There are two types of neglect. The first is self-neglect. So this may be that the environment in which they live is unclean, the person is unclean, animals or spoiled food, etc. The second is the caregiver is neglectful. Requested services may not be being provided, or their natural supports may change, which in turn changes what the participant needs are. Again, if anyone suspects neglect, please fill out a critical incident report and refer it to APS or CPS. To continue with this training, we will next discuss exploitation. In this type of setting, it is often financial exploitation. In other words, someone obtains or uses another person's resources, including but not limited to funds, assets, or property deception, by means of intimidating or similar actions with the intent to deprive the person of these resources. How can you spot exploitation? The outcomes or goals of the participants are not being met, there is little to no conversations based on the needs of the participant, or there may be reluctance or denial by supports to the participant to allow professional opinion or intervention. If you suspect exploitation, this too will require a critical incident report and also referral to APS and CPS. Also note that those who exhibit behaviors like these and earlier ones we've discussed can be indicators of those committing fraud, whether intentionally or in a negligent manner. To wrap this session up, if you suspect fraud, abuse, neglect, or exploitation, you will need to complete a critical incident report, contact DCBS, APS, or CPS, contact local law enforcement if the situation calls for it, and also document everything in detail. Thank you for listening to this training on fraud, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. If you have any questions, concerns, or suggestions, please call Dale at 502-564-6930 or email us at dale.pds@ky.gov.